So our building manager, Linda Marshall, whose birthday, consequently, is today. So I was going to say happy birthday, Linda, if she was watching on the live stream, but I guess I can't. So it's Linda Marshall's birthday today. She said something to me recently, it's a few months ago now, but it has really stuck with me. I don't even remember the context of the conversation she said this in, but she said, have you ever noticed that when you take a shower, you never actually think about washing your body and your hair while you're in the shower? That's really true, at least for me. All kinds of things come into my head while I'm getting ready in the morning routine, except the actual acts of what I'm doing to get ready that are part of the morning routine. Now, because of the nature of who I am and the role that I play as a pastor, many times my shower thoughts devolve into creating timelines that measure the span of life and the points of death. So I'll be showering and think, I've almost been out of high school as long as I was alive before I graduated from high school. How old will I be when Simon graduates from high school? Or Ruth? How about our parents? Will they be of an age where they'll be able to come to high school graduations at that time? What about weddings? Will they still be alive when our kids get married? We've made this transition in our families that our parents are now the oldest generation that's still living. So maybe that's part of the reason why these thoughts come into my head so frequently. But does anybody think that I should write these out on a Facebook post and after contemplating who's going to die when, put at the end, #blessed? We don't think about mourning and death and looming death as a space for blessing. It can be a stark reality when we actually think about it, what can happen over a 15-year period of time. It can lead to a crippling anxiety about the fragility and the brief span of human life. This week, we're exploring the second beatitude of Jesus in our #blessed sermon series of the summer. You'll remember that when Jesus talks about blessing, he's not talking about our material comforts or conveniences or even the physical presence of those we love. When Jesus speaks of blessing, he's talking of those who are in a position to know intimately the assurance and love of God. And so today, Jesus says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." Now, you may think I'm rather morbid with these thoughts that I have about death, and you're probably right. But the opposite extreme is that we want to hold death at bay as though the number of our days are limitless. But even if we keep belting out with Rod Stewart, "Forever Young," our news media informs us each day of the ongoing global pandemic where now 120,000 plus Americans have died of this disease. Infection rates are spiking in places where folks travel for vacation and they're bringing the virus back to their hometowns. Contemplations of death around us these days are pretty hard to avoid or set to the side. So how is God's presence revealed to us then in death? What does the Lord's comfort look like? Well, Jesus reveals God's presence in our story today. We have two people who are no longer able to simply calculate the number of years of life and the timing of their deaths as a hypothetical scenario. Death never works that way anyway. It doesn't operate on the timelines that we want to set for it. The two people that Jesus encounters are different in almost every way except for one. They're each in mourning. The first character we meet, he's a leader in the synagogue. So he's a Jew, like Jesus. He's a moral exemplar in his community. We can assume that he's viewed as a righteous person by his neighbors and his friends. He arrives early on the Sabbath mornings and unlocks the synagogue and brews the coffee. He greets the worshipers at the door, serves on the finance committee, chaperones the youth trips, sends notes of encouragement to the rabbi, and pops into the office every now and then with questions he has about the Torah and how it relates to his life in business and with his family. By our normal understanding, he has a life that is #blessed and all of good God's good things should be coming to him because he's living the right way. Except that his daughter is dead. And he knows the risks that it runs for him to come to this rogue teacher and healer in Jesus. Jesus is out in public. People are around. They're going to see him. Has he lost his mind? What about his reputation? What about his loyalty to his faith? But death destroys all pretense, all need we have to preserve some kind of image before others. The second character we meet in this story is a woman. She interrupts the story. She suffers from an ongoing medical condition. Now, there's kind of two ways that Bible scholars have interpreted what it means that this is a hemorrhaging woman. Traditionally, scholars have told us that she would have been labeled unclean by her community because she would be violating the purity codes of Leviticus, and she would have had to live on the outskirts of the community, shunned from polite society. She would have been viewed as somebody who was a recipient of God's wrath and judgment. She must have done something to deserve this affliction. But there are other Bible scholars who think that that's assuming a bit too much, because there's the possibility that nobody knew this woman had this hemorrhage because of the nature of the affliction. It may be her dark secret, the one that she thinks about as she lies awake at night, wondering if God has abandoned her. But she still has to get up every morning, put on her makeup, head out to the market, socialize, run the PTA meeting, lead the board meeting, play her part. Don't let them see your self-doubt and your fear. Always wondering if her secret will be discovered. She is mourning a state of life that she had before this affliction. And so we have, on the one hand, a respected leader of the synagogue, a powerful, faithful man. And on the other, we have a woman who's either shunned from the community or at least wrestling with herself in fear as to whether her secret will be discovered and it will destroy her both physically and relationally. So you see here, the power of death comes to all people. It equalizes us. It leads us to pour ourselves out. And these mourners, different as they are, they both find themselves in the presence of God. They find themselves with Jesus. And in Jesus, we see what the intimate presence of God looks like in the face of suffering and mourning. The first thing Jesus does in both instances is he turns toward the one who suffers. When we're grieving, we experience the intimate presence of God in those who turn toward our pain. As Eric Coble says in the book, What Jesus Meant, that we're studying as part of this sermon series, turning our hearts toward those in pain is all they really ask of us. We don't hide from it, try to ease it, try to fix it, try to break the tension. We turn toward the pain. That's where God is. The next element that's in both of these stories, the presence of the divinity of God, is in the act of physical touch. The synagogue leader begs Jesus to lay his hand on his daughter. The woman with the hemorrhage says to herself, "If I can but touch the hem of his robe, then I will be healed." And then finally, when Jesus arrives at the house, he takes the girl by the hand. You've read the research, you know from your own personal experience how necessary for human life personal, physical, loving touch is. From the moment that a newborn is laid on the chest of her mother, to hugs and handshakes and high fives, to pats on the back, a squeeze of the shoulder, to the interlocked fingers of people in love. Touch gives life. Touch heals. The presence of the Creator God is seen here in how Jesus uses touch. Comfort comes in touch. And lastly, in both instances, Jesus speaks. Now, pay attention when he speaks to what Jesus doesn't say. He offers no theological treatise for why this little girl has died or why this woman has suffered in such a way. He makes no effort to explain the mind of God. And if anyone ever has had the authority to explain the mind of God, it would be Jesus, God in the flesh. But instead, he says to the woman, "Take heart, daughter. Your faith has made you well." He names her as beloved. He gives her a family title of daughter. And then he points out that she has what she needs to move forward in healing. Her faith, he says, not Jesus' power, has made her well. Isn't that fascinating? Jesus doesn't say, "My power has made you well." He says, "Your faith has made you well." You have the strength, the fortitude, the perseverance to not let this mourning destroy you. But then God gives us the freedom to step out with our faith, to live into that power. Your faith has made you well. So words, an intimate name, daughter, and then this command of encouragement. Your faith has made you well. The other place of speech, Jesus goes to the synagogue leader's house. And here he finds there are many mourners, flute players, professional mourners, and they're making a commotion. The wheels of death are in motion. The music, professional mourners there in the house. But pay attention to what Jesus does here too. He sends the commotion makers away. The presence of God, the blessing of God to those in mourning is to protect them from those who would make a commotion. These are the folks who go to the grieving parents who've lost their child and say, "God won't give you anything you can't handle." Or, "God just needed another angel." Or, "I know how you feel." You don't, by the way. The commotion makers are the ones who care less about attending to the needs of the sufferer and more about meeting their own needs to be viewed by their own conscience as helpful. And Jesus sends them all away. The presence of God does not tolerate pettiness or busybodies in the face of mourning. Now, I don't usually wrap up sermons in a clinical way. Here's 3 things to take away from today's message, but I'm going to today. And it's 3 T's even. So, blessed are those who mourn, they shall be comforted. How is God's blessing, God's comfort known when we grieve? Number 1, turn. When we turn towards the one who's in pain, instead of trying to cover it up or ignore it, when we turn toward the pain, there is the presence of God. Number 2, touch. In the use of healing touch, holding a hand, giving a hug, wiping tears. The presence of God is in the moment of loving touch. And 3, talk. Speaking words that remind a person that they're loved, that encourage the gifts that they possess to move through this suffering, and that pushes out the commotion makers who don't want to deal with the suffering in front of them. Anyone who has mourned knows that these sacred encounters have occurred. You have felt the presence of God in such a way as this in your lowest moments, in the turning of another, in the caring touch of someone else, in just the right words of love. You and I have seen the face of Christ in a way that we'd never seen it before. And we've realized that even in our sorrow, there is a great paradox. That in that moment, we are actually #blessed. Amen.